So the gang's all here, as they say. Stephen and Adele and I are here. Tony will be joining us. Tony holds the distinction of having possibly the busiest schedule of any staff person in the United Church of Canada. He's always multiply booked, so he's probably switching off one meeting and on his way to another. So we will welcome him. We'll welcome him when he arrives. We've just got a relatively short meeting planned for tonight. We're just all getting back into everything, and what we wanted to do this time is do things a little differently than, but we'll go through that schedule a little differently than we have. If you look in the chat, I'm going to put in an agenda, which I've just done. So we plan to be out of here by around 8 p.m. Eastern. So we'll begin with just a welcome back. And then Adela's gonna move us into about 20 minutes of small group work, talking about the theological questions. She'll explain that process to you. Then we'll have some time to report some highlights back. And then we want to have a conversation. It'll probably take place in the chat because even though we're smaller than we normally are, we're still closing in on 50 people, and having 50 mics open will be chaos. But we do want to get some thoughts on you on where we might go next. We have the sense that this was a popular initiative, and there's some energy to carry on, whether it's you as a group or new people or a mixture, but we want to do more exploration of this theme. And so we wanted to hear from you about what you might think about that. And then we'll close at or around 8 o'clock. We might be 5 to 10 minutes over, but that will be our plan. So hopefully that meets everybody's expectations. Because I wouldn't want to not meet your expectations, I am once again going to do a reflection from Richard Wagamuse's Embers. He's been our companion the whole time. And this reading from near the end of his book, I think is an appropriate reading for us at the end of this stage of our journey together. He writes, to tell, to use the act of breathing to shape air into sounds that take on the context of language, that lifts and transports those who hear it, takes them beyond what they think and know and feel, and empowers them to think and feel and know even more. We're all storytellers, really. That's what we do. That is our power as human beings. Not to tell people how to think and feel and therefore know, but through our stories, allow them to discover questions within themselves. Turn off your TV and your devices and talk to each other. Share stories. Be joined, transported, and transformed. Sort of feels like that's what we were doing in the spring, even if we were doing it through devices. So it's not a perfect analogy, but we were using written language more than verbal language, but we did share stories and raise questions with each other as some of what I've been reading. The last couple of days, I've been reading most of the submissions that people made over the summer, whether they were their own stories, their own family stories, or whether they were some beginnings of theological reflection. So I've been reading those the last few days, and again, there is such a common thread. You know, I think I saw a story from Iceland this time. That was the first story of Icelandic settlement I think I read, and I was kind of thrilled to read that. My grandmother-in-law was Icelandic, so it was kind of nice to see that story appear personally. But it was also interesting. Our stories of settlement go much are much broader than we think they are. But common themes of people not knowing what they were coming to, not understanding the depth and breadth of the land that they were coming to, but feeling reassured that it was there for them to make a new life, and not necessarily being prepared for the conflicts that they would meet, the relationships that they would form, but moving forward with them and dealing with them, whether that was in a way that contributed to a good relationship or a bad relationship in terms of relations with Indigenous peoples, and how that story got told down the generations, and how now there is a sense of having to reckon with it, because that's why we're here. So in a sense, the stories, the life stories or the family histories that I was reading this week were they were foretellers of the theological reflections we began to receive, because people were actually asking theological questions about relationship with the land in their stories. And then as I started reading the actual theological reflections, I began seeing that same question. There was lots of reflection back on the story of the Israelites leaving Egypt and coming into a promised land, looking for a promised land. Well, whose promised land? Anyone who raised that story raised that question and said it made me think about it differently when I look at it through the lens of my own family's history. When I look at the trauma in other stories of displacement, the story of Joseph, for example, and the trauma that he endured, made me think about how my story relates to trauma. One person said that we asked the question about where do you see God? Where do you see God's activity in these stories? And one person replied, God is always in these stories because, maybe we're not putting enough faith in God. We're putting our faith in, if we get this piece of land, we'll be okay. Maybe we need to put our faith back in God and relationship. So in a sense, we've made God absent in the story, but God is always there calling us to pay attention, calling us to repair, to build new relationships. And then in terms of the relationship piece and how, we often talk about how do we get ourselves out of this situation that we're in. There was a really thoughtful reflection that one of the participants made, reflecting back on work by an author named Patty Krawick in her book, Becoming Kin. And she points to the fact that the Ojibwe word for ancestor and the Ojibwe word for descendant are actually the same word. You think about that, right? Those who came before me, those who will come after me. It's the same word. And this person, Krawick says this word stitches together across generations. And our colleague in the course wrote, is this the key to healing the past? That we recognize the connections between us, the ancestors, and those yet to come. If we really actually understand that, that we might get beyond. So I thought there were some helpful insights into how we get into this theologically, and some helpful insights about how we might get out. So I wanted to just share those with you very briefly, and I'm going to turn it over to Adele, who's going to lead us in the next section of what you're going to do together.
So thank you, Sarah. What we're hoping that you'll do all together is to continue doing these theological reflections. So many among you have been writing and reflecting in different ways. And in a moment, we'll invite you to move into small groups to continue that conversation. The two questions for conversation will be similar. So the ones that are posted in the chat here. So how might we reflect theologically on our stories, and how might we understand God's activity and the Spirit's movement in the past and present, and particularly in relation to the stories we've been reflecting on in terms of placing ourselves in colonialism. And then secondly, what theological reflections might we share about our stories of liberation and freedom, and also particularly for stories that involve pain and trauma and displacement or intersecting oppressions. So an opportunity to reflect on those in small groups. So in a moment, we'll have a chance to move into small groups. You may opt to, I'm putting in the chat here a Google Doc. So when we move into small groups, you'll see, join group 1 or join group 4. In the Google Doc, we'd invite you to take notes. If you can't open the Google Doc and you're having technical difficulties, please don't worry. Just invite someone in your group to maybe take some notes. You can email those to us afterwards. So if someone in your group can open it and type on it, great. If that's not possible, please feel free to email them afterwards. You'll have 20 minutes for this small group conversation. We'd invite you to just ensure that everyone has space for sharing if they have something to share. As you're reflecting and sharing, you may also want to think about, okay, well, what among this, what might be something that I might want to take back to my community of faith? So, and in these theological reflections, is there something that you may also want to bring back to your home community of faith?
There was a request to repost the question, so I just did that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. So the questions are in the chat. The questions are also, if you are able to open the Google Doc, they're also in the Google Doc. And then when you move into your small group, just look for your group number and then scroll down the document to where your group is. If you're group 10, then that's where you'll be taking notes.
I should let you know the chat persists when you go into the small group. So when you get into your small group, you can open the chat from there and you'll see all the comments that are currently on the chat. If you put anything in addition into the chat, then only the people in your small group will see it until we all come back again. And then all of a sudden the chat will just fill up with other comments too. So probably better to wait on that one. But you can at least see the questions that Sarah and Adele have put in there now. Well, we've set you up in groups of 4. And we're going to give you 20 minutes. Up in the top right corner of your screen, you'll see a countdown clock that lets you know how much time there is left. And you'll get a bit of a warning. And then I think we come back over in about 30 seconds once the clock comes to an end. Any other last words, Adele, Sarah, before I push the button?
And a special welcome to Michael Young's cat. Believe our feline friends should always be recognized. Oh, what a beauty. What a beauty.
So there we go. All of God's creatures are welcome.
There you go.
And welcome, everyone. Welcome back from your continued conversations. It sounds like you had very engaged conversations. I just wanted to pull out a few themes that emerged in the document, and please feel free to continue to add to the document or add to the chat. We'll continue to highlight these, and we're going to save the chat after this conversation. But a few things that emerged, a naming of theology of repentance, that there were continued theological reflections on land and what it means to be in relationship to the land, theologies of mutual acceptance, what that means, what it might look like. Some notes about trauma and how trauma is felt in the body. There were some reflections about Exodus and the stories of seeking liberation, of people seeking liberation. And as well, not necessarily stopping with guilt, but guilt in terms of reflecting on stories of the past, but moving beyond that. That's a small sample of what was noted there. And there's some more emerging in the chat, so thank you for that. So what does liberation look like for the non-oppressed look like? And recognizing that we're slower to realize how settlers need to be freed, and freed from what. Another reflection here in the chat is that the second part of the question, or liberation theology course, was very helpful to a Métis woman, realizing that God is aligned with us. God stands along our struggles. Okay. Noting that our forebrothers were not aware that they had displaced Indigenous peoples. So thank you for these reflections. Spirit, that Spirit is, and how that she needs to think about the land and people in relationships. Great. If there are continued reflections, please feel free to email them. Sarah has put her email in the chat here, sstratton@united-church.ca, and we'll send that out by email as well tomorrow. So we will include those. And if there are other, so please feel free to add to the doc, or please feel free to email, and we will capture these all as a record of our conversation. At this point, would love to invite my colleague Tony Snow, Reverend Tony Snow, who's here, to share any additional theological reflections from these questions and from ones that have emerged. Tony, Sarah, and I have been accompanying this journey from the beginning, and so are delighted that Tony's here to continue some further thoughts and reflections. So Tony?
Yeah, thank you for all of you for returning. I think that it's very indicative of sort of this path that we are on toward a self-knowing. And I think that's part of that mystical journey. It's part of our faith formation and development. And it's an important part of the work that we do within Christianity, within the United Church, within our various communities, that there is some discernment on how we belong and how we understand that belonging in and amongst ourselves. Because as we work through things like the anti-racism declaration and the movement forward, as we work through reconciliation and the adoption of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, as we look at the development of the Indigenous Church and other aspects of our practice and of our institution, we think about how important that is for how we gather in these spaces and what we share, how we develop our understandings of who we are, and how we engage that in ways that help to promote and support our views of this United Church theology that is important for all of us. And so when I think about the storyline of who we tell ourselves who we are, the ancestry, the connection to ancestry for Indigenous people is about that responsibility. It is about that connection to those assumptions and hopes, those visions and those dreams of who we would be in the future. And that's how we think in terms of the 7th-generation idea, that we are not living for ourselves, but we are living for a purposefulness in the community that we are in, that we would prolong the goodness of our stewardship and of our belonging into something that is integral to the world around us. So how do we best live out our talents within that? And so that's part of the responsibility. When I think about ancestry, I think a lot about sort of the gifts that came with particular ancestors, their gift for the medicines, their gift for prayer, their gift for the wondrous things that they had happen. We talk about how they could change the weather, how they could talk to the animals. So there's a lot of connection to those gifts and how they assisted the people. And so when we think about this connection to our ancestry, it's all about finding our place within that, to resonate in our gifts, to do likewise for the next generation. So there's a purposefulness behind it. There's a grounding in who we are and in those places where we come from, that connection to the land, that depth of understanding in how we belong. And so when we talk about things like, here in our area, we have a treaty named Treaty Number 7. We have a relationship with our the settlers and with others that came to the treaty with us, and long-term relationships and things that we think about as we grow into those relationships. They may change over time. They may be hostile. They may not. They may be better at some points. Things that we think about, the stories we tell each other. One of the stories that's important from my background is to talk about some of the ways that we build relationship in our tradition and in our theological practice. We have ways of making relatives. And that's something uniquely for our people that we do as a ceremony, and that is carried on to build up relationships of people who were never connected or never from the same bloodline. There are other ways in which we form relationship with our neighbors. So our indigenous neighbors from BC, those from that came into our area from the Cree, that made a relationship called the Iron Confederacy in the 1600s. We remember those. Those are very current sort of ideas about how we are together, how we belong. And so when we think about ancestry, it's a very immediate thing, very much like our theology of the spirit world, and understanding that the spirits are always with us. The spirits are always around us, and they inform us, they talk to us, they are abiding in this world with us to help guide us. And there are benevolent beings that support our work and help us to nurture into who we will become. And so when we think about those connections to ancestry, it's all connected to this sense of belonging, this sense of wonder. When we think about how that exists in this paradigm of the colonial mechanism, the settlement that happened, there's a lot of fracturing. I'm just going to read a portion from Stephen Charleston's new book called We Survived the End of the World. It says, "What I call the apocalypse process happened here in North America, just as it has in other global communities. When the early Christians, for example, who lived in the first century after the death of Jesus, saw the apocalypse gathering over them like a storm, when the persecutions and killings began, they turned to apocalypse and revelation, looking for a vision for a future they could still hope for and believe in. They turned to people like the mystic who wrote the book of Revelation. They turned to their prophets." And I think this is important because as we think about things like manifest destiny and right to rule and monarchy and these ideas that govern sovereignty over the land and exchange of that into a different type of relationship, there are repercussions of that thinking. And so that becomes another theological basis, another foundation of who we are. And so as we think about how those relationships formed and how we are participating in the continuation of that, there's a deeper connection and understanding that the world that we live in is constrained by the thinking and the actions of those that came before us. And that as we move forward in this world, we have to take on those challenges in order to form the world that we want to participate in and the world as it was meant to be. As we talked from the time of the treaties, those visions and those understandings, all the prayers and all the ceremony that went into understanding how we would be in relationship in the future and what we would want from that, how we would want to engage and live in a peaceful way. So here we live in a very peaceful country because in part, the Native people didn't rise up and didn't overturn the system, even though they were subjected to many hardships. And as Stephen Charleston talks about, apocalypses. And so as we move into a new phase of being through apology and through the idea of reconciliation to form a better balance, how are we then engaging and how are we understanding our role within that? And that a lot of that for me comes from history. I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to Adele and let them move on to the next.
Thank you so much, Tony, for sharing your many, many insights. Very much appreciated. At this point in the conversation, we'll go back to Sarah. Sarah will move us through kind of what's next. So we're in the last gathering of our course together. So what happens now? Over to you, Sarah, please.
We want to get some input. This is not an evaluation, but being a course co-led by Adele Halliday, I can assure you there will be an evaluation form. We're going to send out a more detailed evaluation form about your experience of the course and your ideas moving forward. We'll send that out tomorrow. But right now, we just wanted to get some kind of idea from you where you think we can go next in this educational journey. As I mentioned earlier, we have a sense when we have a sense from you that this has been a very rich experience. When we talk to other people who didn't know about it, they're like, when are you going to offer it again? So we would like to be able to do that. But are there other things we can do? Are there other books that you feel we should be talking about? Are there films you think we should pay some attention to? Would you like to see something? We talked about this briefly at our last session in May. Would you like to see something come out of this session that we've all had together? You know, at any time, there's been between 60 and 170 people in this room. So there's been a lot of conversation. There's a lot of rich material in our forums. Would you like to see something come out of this as a gift or a tool for the rest of the church? You know, we had talked about maybe a do-it-yourself workshop on it. That's something we could do. It strikes me today that there might actually be a theological reflection that emerges from this group to be shared. So that's something to consider. But if there are things that you can think of, please put them in the chat. Questions you want to explore, resources you want to explore, new directions you think we can take in this journey of understanding our place as settlers in this place. I'm going to open up the chat. Whoops, I made it too big. So I'm still seeing some more reporting on groups. That's good. 2 members of our small group are calling around to churches in their same region to see if they have heard of the remit and voting on it. Okay, that's not what I thought it was. Yeah, okay, so serious questions being raised there about the nature of the relationship. So how might we work towards that? It's a question about the remit and what that means for the church. Is there ever going to be a collection of people's stories? I think, Karen, that's a question I think that we would like to look into. And that would certainly involve some permission, but I think it would be really worthwhile because, you know, we had so many commonalities and we also had so many interesting divergences. Everyone's story starts from a common place, but they do go to different places. What about studying the book that Tony just mentioned, Stephen Charleston's book, How We Survived the End of the World? More local opportunities. Yeah, and we could talk about that, Eli, whether that's, do we provide a kind of an outline that folks use? Do we come and help facilitate things? Is it a mixture of both? I would love to hear about how people's behaviors have changed because of this journey. I think that is that's from Nabucco. That's a really profound piece, I think, to think about. What would we say if we checked in 6 months' time or a year's time? Leanne Simpson's book, As We Have Always Done, Indigenous Freedom Through Radical Resistance. Reading that book in community is a suggestion. Other examples of books by Indigenous authors around issues facing their communities. Talking together, continuing to talk together. So you're not empty or devoid of ideas. Films about settlement and dispossession. The Land is Not Empty, Following Jesus and Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery. Keep the course page open for continuing reading and responding. I think that is definitely something we can make a decision on. Use your local stories. This is from Tony. Use your local stories in the work of land acknowledgement or circles. How do we make land acknowledgements actually have meaning? And you can do that by beginning with yourself. Someone has noted, I've had my family stories completely reframed and I'm quite unsettled. Getting back to that question of how we have learned. thinking about reconciliation from the point of view of Indigenous peoples and as opposed to us as settlers, because it's always been defined on our terms, right? If you live in Kitchener-Waterloo, apparently there's a play being performed in October called We Own This Now, deals with the impacts of the doctrine of discovery. Maybe there could be a little organized group, go to that play and report back. Two of you have noted Valley of the Bird Tail. So that is a ton of ideas and a ton of enthusiasm. So we thank you for that. And we will have room for you to fill that in your evaluation tomorrow if you want to add to it. We're saving the chat, so we haven't lost anything that's here, but if you want to reiterate it or add more. And Adele has just messaged me to tell me that Nobuku's question about how has this changed you, that is part of the evaluation tomorrow. So if you want to share that may also be something we can share back in a composite way. Obviously, you wouldn't necessarily be attaching people's names to things, but there's all kinds of ways we can share stuff. So I sort of feel like that's a very rich gathering up of ideas. I'm not surprised because you're just an amazing group. Oh, Michael has put a notice in the chat, which I'll share with you. Michael Young is very involved in the Camp Morgan and Camp Mercedes initiatives, seems the wrong word, in Winnipeg. And he's letting us know that the families were very happy with the United Church making a statement a few weeks back. And then this was followed by a visit from a number of church leaders, including the moderator and some ecumenical friends, to stand in solidarity. So he just wants you to know about that. And I think they might be having a statement coming in the next few days, which relates to land acknowledgements, right, Michael? Yeah. So let's keep our eyes open for that. And remember that is something that the United Church has said, this is a tangible way we can demonstrate our support. A tangible way we can call for meaningful reconciliation is to support the search the landfill site. So that is ongoing. Just because the church leaders went and had a visit doesn't mean that's done. We continue to hold that up. More books, more excellent events, this time in the Greater Toronto area. So we'll have a rich list of things to start working on. So I'm gonna leave the chat for now and just let it. You can still continue to fill things in. We'll get it. Stephen will save it. But this is my last chance to say thank you, at least for now. If you come up with version 2 and you join us, we'll get to do it all over again. But you have been a really dedicated group, and we have appreciated everything you have brought with you, your intentions, your difficulties, your commitment, and your sharing of your stories and your sharing of your thoughts about what this means to you as a person of faith. Some of which has been rocked. I think it's safe to acknowledge. So I would like to ask Tony if he wants to send us out in a prayer. We will, or whatever he feels is appropriate to the moment. And as I said, you'll get an email from us tomorrow with an evaluation form, and then you will continue to hear from us. So again, thank you so much, Tony.
One of the things that resonates at this time, when we think about the residential school survivors telling their stories at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the tribunals that went across the country, unveiling or taking the Band-Aid off of some of those past events, those things that have happened, those things that the family lives with, the trauma and the long-term impact of what has happened. And So a bit of that in this uncovering and what I'm hearing from people who are unsettled, people who are, and that's a very interesting term to say about those settlers. And to understand this is part of that journey, to refine that grounding, that foundation, something stronger that is connected to truth, connected to history, connected to ways that we want to belong, because our agency is involved with this. And so all that to say that it is very good work that people have done, and it is appreciative, but it's something that is for you to be on this journey. And the work that you do will reflect in the opinions and the understandings that you bring out. Well, as we close off our meeting here, I'm just going to offer prayer. I've been smudging here this time to give us good thoughts and purification for how we are and what we are enduring. And I encourage you to find your own ways, either through prayer, through visiting some of your family homestead places or places that are meaningful to you, that you can go and reconnect with, bring your spirit back into your body and help to move you forward in this work. Because it is something that, as I continue to say, is intergenerational. So let us pray. Creator God, you are here with us. You are in us. We belong to you. We are your children. We know that our work here is left undone, and that we continue to work for the graces and the bounty that we have received to be a faithful steward in this land, carer of your creation. Help us to connect again to ourselves and to our families, to take with us all that we have learned about where we come from and who we are, and help that to nurture us into a new space, a space where we belong to you and a space where we belong to one another. Om Jagezi Tuan Chezi, Jesus Christ, when Chapter Chezi. Chagawaka, Uvarichin, Narizi, Narivichavichin. Nagahaz, Naguchane Echia, Chingsazeo, Jesus Christ. Amen. So go in peace.